Hello. Today, Michael Nasha and I, Elena Berg, are here to talk a little bit about the plastic problem with the bottled water industry. So specifically how plastics get recycled, how big of an issue that is. And then we'll transition to talking about the kinds of choices that we make in our lives that have environmental implications and how we can maybe make those choices relative to bottled water.
When you talk to people about bottled water and they become interested in water and see that water is not just water, it tastes different. The first questions I'm getting over the last 20 years or so is glass or plastic. What's better? Is there some danger from PET, from some chemicals leaching into the water? Does plastic affect the taste? So this glass PET question is a big question. And very seldom do I get the environmental concern about the glass PET. When people talk about water, it's usually the glass versus plastic issue. But I think what Elena was saying, it's really important also to talk about the influence of PET on the environment. And we will do this, I think, elaborately in this show.
I think maybe it's useful to start with a little history, a very, very short history of PET. So that stands for, I always have to look it up because I'm not a chemist, but polyethylene terephthalate. So PET plastic, it's actually been around since the 40s, but it was a DuPont engineer who actually figured out how to form it into plastic bottles in 1973. So at that point begins the revolution that we are witnessing now with just plastic bottles all over the place. So the advantage of these PET bottles is that they are very light, they're very cheap to make using petroleum products, and they are clear, so you can easily see through and see the liquid inside, which of course for water is pretty key. You want to make sure that it doesn't have a color, etc. And the other really important thing about this substance is that it can handle the pressure of carbonation. So before that wasn't possible. So people used initially ceramic and then glass, even aluminum, to hold in especially carbonated substances, but also non-carbonated substances until these PET bottles were formed. But these bottles are a trade-off, right? They're absolutely everywhere. So I think one of the main messages that we need to think about is volume, right? How much of these products are you buying? What kind of waste does it produce, etc. Do you have anything you want to add to that sort of history of plastic?
No, I'm not a chemist on the history of plastic. I want to tie into the word volume, you said. And it's really interesting. If you talk to bottlers, we're talking about the small, water farmers, the small bottlers, they have to have two lines, very, very seldom. And only if you're really successful with your brand can you just survive with glass. Most of them have glass and PET lines. And the glass line is always considered a high margin line where you have a lower volume and a higher margin. Those are the prestige. This is your brand is in glass. And in PET, you have the lower margin, higher volume bottlings. So the problem with PET is exaggerated by, exactly as Elena was saying, that even from a brand point of view, the higher volume is usually with the PET line and not the glass line. The glass line is considered to be something more specific. I just want to ask you, I know you're not a chemist, but maybe you can answer the question. So PET is not PET, right? There are many different levels of PET. Because people ask me, does PET influence your taste? And for the longest time, I said no. I didn't notice any difference, the same water in PET and in glass. And then a couple of years ago, was at a water tasting in China, and we tasted some of the more commodity waters. And suddenly I had this wide variety of tastes in the water. And I was totally surprised. And it turned out to be the plastic. So it seems like that different levels of plastic can actually affect the taste, and only the very high standard of PETs we have here in the US and in Europe and in other countries allow water to have no taste. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I would be surprised if there were really different standards for PET. My kind of impression has been that there's a global industrial standard for different kinds of PET, and that people are making efforts all the time to kind of reduce the amount of plastic needed per bottle. And now there are actually certain kind of bioplastics that are being incorporated, or recycled bottles that are being incorporated in. But one thing that affects flavor is how long the water has been in the container, and also whether it's been in what kind of conditions it's in. Is it been stored in hot or cold conditions? Has it been exposed to light, right? Because heat can break down plastic, and those the plastic can then leach into the bottle, and that can impact flavor. It can also impact health, right? You can start getting things that are not healthy for you. I think it was 2008 when the EPA scare hit, right? Which was these substances in plastic that could, if they leached into the liquid at a high enough volume, or could, bring carcinogens into your body. So there was a huge concern about BPA, and that was actually phased out of all or most things that had anything to do with food or water or kids' toys and stuff like that. So there's been a lot of change in sort of the plastic industry over recent years as people have learned kind of how to work with it and how to change it. But I think the flavors that people are noticing are probably more influenced by how that water's been stored under what conditions. But maybe someone who knows more about this can pipe in the comments. Yeah, I think that one of the things we want to focus on today is this trade-off between glass and plastic. I want to highlight that it's not just the substance in the bottles, it's the process of creating those bottles. And per unit, for example, per glass bottle, it takes a lot more fossil fuels to create a glass bottle than it does to create a plastic bottle. This is another one of these issues. For example, if you go to the grocery store and you buy yourself a cotton bag and you feel super proud of yourself because you bought a cotton bag and hey, you can reuse it. And then you realize that you have about 52 of these cotton bags at home. The reality is it takes a huge amount more energy, water, fossil fuels to produce a cotton bag than a plastic bag. So it really becomes about how you use those materials. Are you actually going to use that bag 300 times? Or are you going to use it twice and think that you're saving the environment? It's a similar kind of equation going on with bottled water, right? That glass, in some ways is better. It is actually easier to recycle. The plastic recycling process is a little bit more complicated, and a lot less plastic gets recycled. I think the statistics I've seen anywhere between 1 in 6 plastic bottles in the US gets recycled to 30% of plastic gets recycled, versus glass, which is a much higher percentage. It's just easier to separate out. It's easier to melt it down into new forms, and there are fewer kinds of glass that can kind of get in the way of that process, whereas there's a zillion kinds of plastic. And to recycle it properly, you really have to get in there and have machinery that can separate all the different kinds of plastic out. And that's been problematic for a long time.
Yeah, it looks like, again, it's complicated and there are no easy solutions, right? It's really a complicated, multidimensional space. You have to make your choice, make decision. And sometimes quick, emotional, very short-sighted solutions are sometimes not the best if you consider the whole system. And for the longest time, I thought plastic is not so good, glass is good. So every time I may had a choice between glass and plastic, glass and PET, of course I choose the glass, not only because of the environmental background, but also because of the tactile sensation, the aspect of luxury, this feeling good, touching something. It's heavy. It feels good. It presents the water nicely. It has a little bit of a luxury aspect. So that was always the choice for when I was asking glass or PET. But then you come exactly as Elena was saying, the carbon footprint from PET and glass are very different. And now we see people putting water into aluminum cans. And again, it's very good for recycling, but the carbon footprint, the fossil fuel needed to put water into aluminum can is probably very, very much higher than doing it with PET. So it's really this complex problem. And I think the more information you have, the better a choice you can make. And we want to have that episode here, not only about plastic, but also about choices that you make and what is the impact of the choice you make. And hopefully you have as much information as possible and as much reliable scientific information as possible on the impact of your choice.
This was a really profound development for me, I guess, over the last couple of years. As an environmental scientist, training myself to become more knowledgeable about conservation and sustainability, was the realization that that there are these externalities, I guess, to all of these processes, right? You can look at a glass bottle, a plastic bottle, an aluminum can, and you can try to make a choice just based on the face of things. But the reality is you have to know about the processes that create those materials and how those materials then, what kind of future life those materials have. So you have to have this really big view of what's gone into making these things and what goes into breaking them down after they've had a useful life. So I would argue that actually this is true for every kind of decision that we make. So if we're trying to make an effort to be to live more sustainably, to have a lower carbon footprint, it's tough, right? Because you think, okay, I'm going to buy this t-shirt. Well, I'm buying this t-shirt from this place that may use certain processes or might use child labor, right? There becomes all of these pieces to the puzzle that you need to consider to make wise decisions. And this becomes at times a bit overwhelming for the consumer, because you might be somebody who really wants to make good decisions, and maybe you have the income to be able to be flexible about what you buy, but it may be difficult for you to be informed about all the processes that go into all of the things that you buy. So I think that one job that the small water producers have, which we touched on in previous episodes as well, is one job they have is to break this down for the consumer and to outline very clearly what they are doing, and to also be really honest about what the process is, right? If you're going out to harness iceberg water, you are using fuel in those boats, right, to go out and do that work. So that's part of your equation, right? You think, what does it take for me not only to harvest this water, but then to bottle it and to transport it, etc. So this is what businesses have to do to basically become certified carbon neutral. They have to think through their entire production process, and they have to incorporate all of these externalities.
Yeah, if everyone in the industry, in the bottled water industry, from the small to the big ones, realize how big the problem is with the plastic pollution and the carbon footprint. And again, two issues related, but sometimes have different outcomes of equations. But the plastic problem, the plastic trash problem, is really huge, and everyone in the industry is addressing it. I can tell you, every time I talk to people, they say, what can we do about this issue? And when I come back, you have probably heard it if you watched other episodes, that we think it's all about the choice, as we said. And we think if you make a choice and you buy a plastic bottle, then make sure the product that's in the bottle is worthwhile the effort and the environmental impact of the plastic bottle, and the product that's in the bottle is a natural product and not a processed water product. We've made a difference between those two products, being a natural product and being a processed product, and how little sense it makes to put purified tap water nicely labeled into a plastic bottle. And depending where you live, in the US, I would say 40 to 50% of the plastic bottles sold is basically processed tap water. So that's also something we can look into in the future by, we will not completely eliminate PET, but we can make a choice and eliminate a lot of plastic from the environment by making deliberate choices, seeing the difference between two products, a natural product, a processed product. The processed product is similar to what you have in your tap water. If you don't like the tap water, put a filter on it, and you have eliminated a large amount of PET. And unfortunately for all of us, the PET collects in huge spots in the ocean, right?
Yeah, so I think actually this is a good time to talk a little bit about the plastic problem. So what is the problem? And to talk about possible solutions to that problem. Okay, so you pointed out correctly, which is that we have all these choices to make, and that it's not always clear what the right choice is. So I think that maybe starting with the problem with plastic, and then moving on to the kinds of choices we can make, we can help resolve this a little bit. So plastic, it was hailed as this unbelievable engineering breakthrough, right? It's moldable, it's flexible, depending on there's lots of different kinds of plastic. So I actually had a student in one of my classes finally illuminate me to what all of those codes on the bottom of the plastic containers actually, what do those codes mean? And those codes tell you what chemical properties that plastic has and the degree to which that those products can be recycled, essentially. Anyway, so the problem with plastic, so the wonderful thing about plastic is its versatility, right? You can use a tiny amount, for making a plastic bottle, it's just a tiny amount of plastic that gets blown out into the shape of a bottle that actually can be, for big companies, these bottles can be made on site, right? So there's no transportation necessary from a production company to the bottling site. You can make them on site. So it's a wonderful substance in theory. The problem with it, as I said, has to do with volume. Plastic does not degrade. So your plastic water bottle that you're throwing into the landfill may take 500 to 1,000 years to degrade or longer. And that's not necessarily a problem if you just use a little bit of it, but the issue with plastic use is that we use more and more plastic every year, not just in the bottled water industry, right? That's one that we're highlighting because that's a really emotional issue for people. And there's an enormous amount of plastic water waste from this industry that's very, very visible. But we're using plastic in all areas of our lives. We buy food that has a tremendous amount of packaging, right? Everything that we buy has a lot of packaging. People are switching now, moving more now to buying food in bulk, for example. But where you go and you bring your own bag and you fill it with flour or whatever. But in general, we use a lot of packaging. We've grown used to this convenience, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is relatively recent, right? It wasn't that long ago, just a few decades ago, that people did not have access to these single-use items, these easy packaging solutions. Right, so it was hailed as this amazing breakthrough, but it doesn't break down. And what inevitably happens is that the majority of it ends up in the world's oceans. And most of you may have this image of like this giant floating pile of garbage that's called the Great Pacific sort of gyre garbage patch. In fact, you don't see it like that. The real issue is that plastic bottles, plastic containers break down into little tiny pieces that are called microplastics. So anytime they're under about 5 millimeters, they are called microplastics. And for a long time, nobody knew anything about them. Great, they break down, we don't have to think about it. But in fact, what we're finding out is that those tiny pieces of plastic don't degrade, they have a tendency to absorb pollutants. So these plastics attract certain kinds of poisonous, carcinogenic substances, and then other organisms eat those plastics that are mixed up in the water column, and those toxins bioaccumulate. What that means is that those toxins go into the tissues and glands of the animal, and they don't get flushed out. And so as you move up the food chain, you have this intensification of toxins. And then we, of course, eat fish. So mercury is a good example of something that bioaccumulates, right? That it runs off into the oceans, into waterways. Fish end up, small organisms absorb that moves up the food chain to big fish. We eat this fish, and that's very toxic for us. But plastic has a similar effect that we don't understand very well. So that's one of the major problems with plastic.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and the images are clear. And I think the bottled water industry is definitely aware of the issue and is really trying to find solutions for it. And we've seen this for a couple of years now, that people started in the industry starting to work with biodegradable bottles. So I think that is something where the industry is really, on the forefront. And I would like to think that especially the bottled water category is on the forefront of this trend of biodegradable bottles, because it's also in the forefront. It gets the brunt of the assault, so to speak, for the plastic bottles, because people think that every bottle that's floating in the ocean is a water bottle. And we need to keep in mind that many other things are also, sold in PET and plastic bottles that contribute to the pollution. But can you tell us a little bit about this breakthrough of biodegradable plastic? What does it mean? Does it work?
Yeah, so it's a relatively new technology, and sometimes results in some greenwashing. So there is if a company just says, oh, we're using biodegradable plastic, or we're using some of these bioplastics, then there's assumption, oh, great, there's no problem now. But as I understand it, there's a few things that people are trying to do. One is to use a different kind of plastic that breaks down more easily. The problem with that is that it doesn't necessarily break down unless it's at the right conditions. So it may in theory break down, but in practice, if those bottles end up in a landfill with the improper conditions, it may not break down very well. So it's not a perfect solution, having these other kinds of plastics. Another thing people are trying to do is incorporate more, is to use more recycled material. So there's stricter regulations now on requiring companies to incorporate more plastic that's already had a life, that's already been recycled and is being reincorporated into new bottles. I think until recently, the standard was there wasn't really no regulation about how much recycled material you needed to use. And so people were generating brand new plastic bottles with every generation. Just wanted to just respond to one thing you said, that, why is the bottled water industry targeted? It is true that we use a lot of plastic in lots and lots of different contexts, but the bottled water industry, when we go back to this question of drinking processed water, right? Going and getting giant 6-packs of 2-liter bottles that we take home thinking this is what we have to drink to stay hydrated. That is, I think, where the big problem lies. So not only in countries where the tap water is safe, where people think, oh, well, yeah, but the bottled water is safer, which is not true. But it's also, of course, a problem in places where the tap water is not safe and people are forced to buy a lot of packaged water. So actually, the bottled water industry is a really big culprit, more so than many other industries, because of just the volume of that plastic that's generated for this single-use, hydration.
So what could be, we should also talk about what could be a possible solution. And I think one of the most interesting things, of course, use less plastic. But if you ship, and so I think the easiest solution is use less plastic and reduce the plastic for water that's processed that you could get from the tap, eliminating large amounts of plastic. But I wanted to know, so you have now to make a decision, should I buy the water? I want this water, it's a special water, I want to have a special occasion, I want to drink this, it matches, pairs with the food, I want to have that. So the choice between glass and PET, which choice I'm making? I'm working in two different scenarios here, right? One is if I use the plastic bottle, I'm reducing the plastic waste. If I use the glass bottle, or let's say it's an aluminum bottle, I have probably a much higher carbon footprint. So what do you think? How should we make decisions here? It's complicated, isn't it?
Yes, as usual, it's complicated. I love so water's not just water, and it's complicated. We have to decide sort of what our main little sound bites are for this series. But yes, it's it's not that straightforward. So this is why I talked about the externalities, where you have all these other things that are going on when you make a decision, right? That you have to be informed about what happens. I think it depends. So as I said, one of the problems with plastic is that people don't recycle it. And so I would say the very best solution is to use less. So that is something that is absolutely necessary as we move forward. We have to use less plastic, whether it's in the packaging of the food that we buy. Just demand less packaging, right? Don't buy the pineapple that's pre-cut up in a plastic styrofoam container, right? Just don't. So try to demand less packaging. And I would say, you know, it depends. Make an effort to recycle your plastic, but then again, part of the problem is that for the consumer, they may not always have control over that, right? You can be amazing about putting everything in your recycling bin, and then depending on where you live, that stuff might just get thrown into a landfill, because it could be that people have mixed the wrong plastics in, and so the entire batch is contaminated and it just gets thrown out. Or it could be that the funding to reliably recycle that plastic is not there, and so a district will say that they recycle, but actually they don't. Right? So plastic recycling is one of these kinds of recycling I think that's particularly problematic. And I don't think it's the primary solution. The primary solution is to use less of it, because it's environmentally costly to break it down, right? There's a lot of pollutants that are generated when you recycle plastic. It is much more difficult to recycle. Oftentimes it's not recycled at all because of that difficulty. Whereas, as I said, glass and aluminum are more reliably recycled. So we could imagine a system maybe where we put deposits on plastic bottles. People are starting to do that. So we have deposits for aluminum cans in the US, and almost 100% of aluminum cans are recycled as a result, right? People are very driven by how they can save money. So maybe putting a deposit on plastic, that there's been a lot of resistance to that, because that is a cost that then gets handed to the consumer and it drives up prices and people don't like that. And also it's expensive to run these systems of getting you know, the bottles back and giving people money for those bottles, right? There's infrastructure involved in that. But I think that could be one way. When I lived in Germany for a couple of years, and I was always really impressed by how much deposit glass that they had, right? Where you would buy your pot of yogurt, and then you would return that glass and you would get your 20 cents back, sometimes €1 back for whatever it was. And then that would go back to that company, get washed and used again. With plastic, it's more complicated because you can't wash it. You can't reuse it. It's designed to be a single-use container. So the best thing you can do with it is to just melt it down and reform it. So there's different kinds of equations here, I would say, in terms of reducing the plastic that's out there, even though it costs, I would say drink less, buy glass, which is easier to recycle, right? And we know isn't going to produce the kind of plastic pollution in our waterways and on land. And in part because we know so little about the health impacts of microplastic on us, right? We're finding more and more out, and it's pretty alarming, right? And note that microplastics have been found at high volume in bottled water. The question is, how do they get there? Most likely it's in the bottling process, not from the source itself, but you may be ingesting a lot more microplastics when you drink water from a plastic bottle. That said, there are also certain kinds of substances that you end up absorbing more of when you drink out of glass, right? Lead. There are other things that can be more problematic with glass as well. So no substance is totally perfect in terms of packaging.
Yeah, so thank you for this very nice overview. So it looks like really we have to make really deliberate choices. We have to look out and see that our choices have impact, and if we have an idea what we want to achieve, which choices we need to make to achieve those goals. And what scientists usually do is they make a flowchart at this point. So we're very fortunate Elena has made a flowchart for us that will allow us to make the right decisions. And she will walk us through the flowchart now. And we're going to put it up a little bit on the screen. And there's a link below where you can click and you see the whole thing printed out with you. And whenever you're in the supermarket and you need to make a choice about yes or no, use Elena's flowchart.
Yeah, so my disclaimer here is that this is just something I generated entirely for myself. It doesn't represent anybody else's views but my own. But I, as a scientist, I like to have systematic ways of thinking through problems. And one way and I'm a field biologist by training, so I'm used to using a key to help me figure out what species of tree I'm looking at or what bird I'm looking at. And this is my key, I guess, for trying to figure out what to do. So the main question that I would ask, so the heading of this flowchart is, which water should I drink? The main question is, well, are you drinking for hydration? Or are you drinking because you're really curious about experiencing the different flavors of water? If it's hydration, then you have to ask yourself another question, which is, let's go down the hydration route, okay? So I'm not interested in the flavors per se, I'm just thirsty. So then I would ask, is the tap water safe in my area, okay? Most of the US, Europe, many parts of the world have very, very, very well regulated tap water, much more regulated than bottled water. So it is safe to drink. So there, okay, then drink. Does the water have an acceptable taste to you? That's another piece of this. And if it's safe to drink and it has an acceptable taste to you, then please drink tap water. Make an effort to get a reusable container. There's wonderful reusable bottles on the market now, and drink tap water, okay? This is another, we talked about this a bit last time, but this is where having better access to public drinking fountains is a key part of this, right? If we're buying that single-use bottle for convenience, then what it says is that we've gotten used to this life of convenience. We want to grab that bottle off the shelf, but it means having a little more forethought, having your own bottle with you. You can use a single-use PET bottle again, but the longer you use it, the more likely it is that the plastic, that chemicals will leach in to the water, particularly if it's been at higher temperatures. So it's not recommended to use that single-use container multiple times. Okay, so if your tap water tastes good and it's safe, drink that. Let's put more effort into infrastructure to make that easier for people. If the water does not taste okay, or you live in an area where the tap water is not safe, then you have to ask yourself, well, can I afford to install a specialized water filter in my home? If so, that's a great way forward. If you can't, depending on where you live in the world, it may be that you have to buy processed water. There may be water delivery services, there may be ways of getting bigger containers of water delivered, etc. So you'd have to look into other options there. Okay, so that deals with the hydration question, right? And in very few cases there is processed water going to be the way to go. The other part of this equation, which is relevant to me and Michael when we're thinking about wanting to have a nice water with a special meal, if you have strong feelings, but the kind of water you usually drink is one of the processed waters that we've talked about, like Aquafina or Dasani, then what we've argued through this whole series is there's nothing interesting about those waters. Those are tap waters. So that means go back to the tap water side. But if no, you are someone who thinks a lot about this, then if you're going with a water that's owned by one of the big 4 companies that in some cases has a more difficult environmental track record, be cautious. If you're looking to enjoy water from a small water farmer, like the ones we're talking about here, then you can go even further. You can say, well, does this company have a clear environmental statement? Are they clear on their website about how they protect their source, about how they are achieving carbon neutrality, what projects around the world they're supporting, etc. And maybe favor those, right? Or make demands of your favorite water to do a better job of that. So this is just one way of thinking about this problem. I think the vast majority of water drinking that goes on is of processed water, and I think that's a totally unnecessary source of plastic waste and a really huge source of plastic waste that we could, I think, decrease by improving education.
Thank you very much. This was, very good. But it clearly shows there is not a 1-minute solution to everything and one thing we need to do and the problem is over. It will depend on all of us to do little things. And what we need to do is we basically need to wake up. We cannot make this unconscious decision going to the supermarket, grabbing a bottle and drinking it because we're thirsty. We need to be aware that we make a choice and that our choice has some impact. And we need to pay attention. And we started paying attention to many things, but what Elena and I are saying, you need to pay attention to the water, make a clear distinction. Are you thirsty? Do you want to hydrate? Or are you looking for a special experience? If you look for the experience, go for a bottled water. Don't feel guilty about it, because other people, when they want to have an experience, they buy a bottle of wine, beer, or rum. So you can do the same thing. You don't have to feel guilty for buying water for an experience. But if you buy water for hydration, you should look at any other option that you can have before you buy a bottled water. And sometimes it's the only option you have. You're traveling in a foreign country, you're not sure if we can drink the water. Of course, you will have a bottle of water. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to make conscious decision, understanding that they have some impact, and you can be part of the solution. And if many people would do exactly what we suggested here, we would see a significant reduction in PET bottles around the world, because we're eliminating the unnecessary processed water in a plastic bottle, which most of us do not consider bottled water. It just looks like it, but it's not bottled water.
I agree completely. I think that it's really about making those choices and making conscious decisions. Again, we recognize that it's not always easy to get the information, but I guess that's why I thought I'd put together a little flowchart. Another, I think it's useful to have a few statistics here, just so people can have perspective on how big the problem is. So there are about 1 million bottles that are thrown out, I guess, per minute. Americans buy 29 billion water bottles per year, and only anywhere between 1 in 6 and 2 in 6 of those is actually recycled. So 29 billion water bottles a year. I doubt very much that a high percentage point of those are people who are really interested in the Epicurean experience, right? These are people who are buying it for convenience, because they're afraid of their tap water, whether or not that's justified. or just because they are not very well informed about those kinds of choices. And in US landfills, there are 2 million tons of plastic water bottles currently. So this is, I find it a little bit hard to absorb what these numbers mean, but they're enormous numbers. A lot of plastic ends up in the oceans, and actually scientists know almost nothing about what happens to those plastics once they get there, and that's terrifying, because the more we learn about microplastics, the more we realize that they can have very serious consequences on biodiversity and on human health, right? So I would say, as last piece of that flowchart is, well, maybe buying glass actually does make sense if you're buying at the volume that we're talking about, because we know that it can be recycled efficiently. We know that it's not going to end up in the oceans. We know that it breaks down at a much greater rate than plastic does. So in terms of the amount of fossil fuels it takes to produce that glass bottle, that's higher than a plastic bottle. But in terms of, if you imagine the entire lifetime of that bottle, the glass has we have a lot more control over what happens to that glass than we do with plastic. So I guess I would argue, drink less bottled water, drink higher quality bottled water, and go for glass and reuse that glass. So there are some of my favorite brands that I think have really beautiful bottles, and I keep those bottles and I use them for different things. So that's another kind of way of thinking about it, or just be sure to go and recycle it.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. If you have the choice between plastic and glass, always go for glass. It's so much nicer. It's tactile, it's sensual. You want to touch it, and you can reuse it. We have some waters here that have beautiful bottles, and many people keep the bottle and make it into a vase. If you look at our kitchen, we have many brands of bottled water bottles there that are filled with different things, from oils, from other things that we keep in the kitchen. So there are many uses for it's just very much nicer substance for having a bottle. It has this tactile feeling. And you mentioned this, I haven't heard this number, the 29 billion bottles in the US, you said, which, can you imagine that 10 to 12 billion of those bottles is just processed tap water? And with people making more and more the choice of buying only natural water and not the processed tap water, we would eliminate 10 to 12 billion bottles from the waste. So significant impact. If you're well informed, you pay attention, and you make the right choices. Doesn't mean to have to give it up. We're not telling you don't drink bottled water, but focus on drinking natural water and enjoy it for the experience, for hydration. Use different things, not bottled water.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. Like I said, there are no easy answers, but I do feel like there are answers if we make the effort to be informed. And like so many things, you have to make that effort to find out what's out there, and also to make demands, right? If you have a favorite brand of a small water farmer and they don't have a particularly strong environmental track record, or they're not making things clear, you're a customer, you're important to them. Make it clear that that's important to you. And I think that can make a big difference.
Well, thank you very much, Elena, sharing your expertise here with us as an environmental scientist, and being so open-minded to water. Really enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. This is fun, and I hope that the flowchart is useful to somebody, or if not, I hope that this conversation at least kind of piqued your interest and made you curious, and makes you a little bit more of an informed consumer about the stuff that you buy. So thank you, and I'll talk to you next time.